ours, but now we will begin. The impact of multiple wars with Russia on Ottoman Empire people, as in population, economy, debt of the country, and how these changed literature and human mind on Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which spanned much of Southeast Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa for over 600 years, was profoundly impacted by its wars with Russia, especially during the 18th and 19th centuries. These conflicts, notably the wars of the 18th and 19th centuries, had devastating consequences for the empire's people, economically, politically, and socially. These impacts also resonated in the realm of Ottoman literature and the philosophical reflections of the time, contributing to a broader cultural shift in how the Ottoman people and intellectuals viewed their place in the world. The impact of wars on Ottoman population and society. Population loss and demographic shifts. The wars with Russia, especially the major conflicts such as the Crimean War, Russo-Turkish Wars, and the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, had a profound impact on the Ottoman population. These wars were often marked by widespread destruction, high casualty rates, and the displacement of civilians. Military losses. The Ottoman military suffered immense losses during these wars. The Ottoman armies faced the well-organized Russian forces, and while they occasionally scored victories, these were often short-lived. The devastating losses on the battlefield not only weakened the Ottoman military capacity but also led to the loss of many young men, which in turn had social repercussions for the empire's communities, particularly those that had already been destabilized by the long years of war. Civilian impact. Civilians in the affected regions, particularly in eastern Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, bore the brunt of the violence. The wars disrupted daily life, leading to food shortages, economic instability, and widespread famine. During the wars, villages were often looted and destroyed, leading to massive displacement and forced migration. Particularly in regions such as the Caucasus and Crimea, the conflict caused the displacement of ethnic groups, such as Crimean Tatars and Circassians, who fled or were forcibly relocated to Ottoman territories, contributing to demographic shifts that reshaped the empire's social fabric. Depopulation of key regions. Areas heavily involved in the conflict, like the Balkans and Crimea, saw large-scale depopulation as a result of the wars. The forced migrations and the devastation of local populations left regions underdeveloped and difficult to govern. This demographic shift significantly weakened the empire's grip on key territories and undermined its ability to sustain its power in the long run. Economic strain and debt. The economic consequences of these wars were dire for the Ottoman Empire. The prolonged conflicts with Russia, alongside other challenges such as internal strife, foreign intervention, and the empire's attempt to modernize, drained the Ottoman treasury and led to crippling debt. Military expenditures and war costs. The wars with Russia required significant military spending, which placed enormous pressure on the Ottoman state. The empire, which was already struggling financially due to inefficient taxation, a corrupt bureaucracy, and internal revolts, found it increasingly difficult to finance its military campaigns. The result was that the empire often had to rely on loans from European powers to fund the wars, further exacerbating its financial woes. Trade disruption and economic decline. The wars, especially those involving border regions and key trade routes, caused severe disruptions to trade. As Ottoman forces clashed with Russia, many traditional trade routes were cut off, causing economic stagnation in the empire. The empire's agricultural output also suffered, particularly in regions devastated by conflict, leading to food shortages and inflation. Additionally, the empire lost key territories that were vital for its economic stability, such as parts of the Black Sea region, Crimea, and the Caucasus. Debt and dependency on Europe. By the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire's debt had reached astronomical proportions. The empire borrowed large sums of money from European countries, particularly Britain, France, and Germany. These loans were often accompanied by unfavorable terms, such as the control of strategic infrastructure by European creditors. The resulting dependency on European powers further weakened the Ottoman state, leaving it vulnerable to external manipulation and intervention. Literature and intellectual reflection. As the Ottoman Empire struggled with the external pressures of war, economic decline, and internal corruption, its intellectual and literary scene began to reflect the tumultuous environment. Ottoman literature, both in poetry and prose, began to shift toward themes of loss, decline, and the search for meaning in a world seemingly marked by inevitable collapse. The rise of realism and disillusionment. The Ottoman intellectual scene during the 19th century, especially in the aftermath of wars with Russia, saw a gradual shift from the classical Islamic literary traditions to more modern and realistic depictions of life. The trauma of war, combined with economic hardships, inspired writers and poets to address the realities of life in the empire. Realism in literature. Authors such as Namık Kemal and Ziya Pasha began to use literature to reflect the plight of the Ottoman people. The hardships caused by war and the inability of the Ottoman elite to modernize or protect their people from external threats led to a growing sense of disillusionment in the literary circles. Namık Kemal, in particular, began to criticize the oppressive nature of the Sultan's rule and the empire's inability to modernize in the face of European powers. Loss and national identity. The wars with Russia, and the resulting loss of territory, led many Ottoman intellectuals to grapple with a sense of lost national identity. As territories in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and Crimea fell under Russian control or were lost to nationalist movements, many Ottomans questioned their empire's future. Literature began to reflect a sense of nostalgia for the past, mixed with a desire for a new national consciousness. The idea of reform, both socially and politically, began to take shape, as writers such as Kemal and Pasha called for modernization and the adoption of European models. The rise of political satire and critique. The political disillusionment of the period, driven by both the military defeats and the empire's growing debt, also gave rise to satire in Ottoman literature. Writers critiqued the empire's political leadership, its military failures, and the incompetence of the ruling elite. Criticism of the empire's leadership. In the aftermath of Russia's victories, many Ottoman writers began to openly critique the sultans and their inability to manage the empire's military and economic affairs. These critiques often took the form of sharp political satire and plays, which subtly conveyed the dissatisfaction of intellectuals with the status quo. In this context, works like those by the poet and philosopher Ziya Pasha, who had a profound influence on the modernization movement, became popular. Pasha's works combined political critique with calls for reform and modernization, focusing on the idea that the empire needed to adapt to survive. Humanism and philosophical reflection. With the growing sense of crisis, Ottoman intellectuals increasingly turned to philosophical reflections on human nature, society, and the meaning of life. As the empire's territorial and economic power waned, thinkers sought solace in intellectual and spiritual contemplation. The hardships endured by the population became the subject of reflection. And humanism emerged as a significant theme in the writings of figures like Sanasi and others who pushed for the empire to adopt reforms inspired by European Enlightenment thinkers. The emergence of the Tanzimat and reforms in literature. The Tanzimat reforms, which began in 1839, were an attempt by the Ottoman state to modernize and catch up with the powers of Europe. These reforms had a significant influence on Ottoman literature. Writers began to focus more on issues such as individual rights, freedom of speech, and the relationship between the state and its people. A call for political and social reform, literature from the period reflected the desire for change and reform. Writers like Namık Kemal championed the idea of freedom, equality, and constitutionalism. These ideas were influenced not just by the wars and their aftermath but also by the failure of the empire to defend its territories and people from external enemies. As the Ottoman people witnessed their empire's weakening position in the face of Russia and other European powers, intellectuals began to call for internal reforms to strengthen the state. Modernization and westernization. The wars with Russia and the empire's decline spurred intellectuals to look toward Europe for answers. The spread of European literature, philosophy, and political thought began to influence Ottoman writers who were now grappling with the idea of modernization. Many of them began to experiment with Western literary forms, such as the novel and the play, and to question the old ways of thinking about power, identity, and governance. Conclusion. The Ottoman Empire's wars with Russia deeply affected its population, economy, and political structure. The people of the empire faced immense suffering in the form of military losses, displacement, economic instability, and the erosion of national identity. These wars exacerbated the already existing socio-political issues in the empire, pushing it into debt and dependency on European powers. In literature, the impact of these wars was reflected in the shift towards realism, political satire, and philosophical reflections on the state of the empire. Writers began to critically engage with the empire's decline, questioning the nature of its leadership, its economic system, and its ability to defend its people. The wars with Russia thus marked a pivotal point in Ottoman intellectual history, leading to a more modern, politically aware, and reform-oriented literary tradition. This period of war and reflection, marked by loss and intellectual awakening, was crucial in shaping both the Ottoman Empire's final years and the intellectual landscape of the modern Middle East.